my name is Rebekah Yahovah from Teshuvah Ministries, and tonight I'm going to do a basics Purim video. So this basics video on Purim I am doing not only so that I remember what it is, what Purim's about next year, because it seems like every year tend to forget again what each feast and each festival is about. So this is one reason I create things, is so that I remember next year, but also for my children and their families that they raise later, that they will remember what these feasts and festivals of Yahovah are about. So for the next generation. Now tonight I'm going to invite you into my family's expression of Purim here in our Persian palace that we make for Purim. This is our experience of Purim right here. Purim was actually a few days ago, but we are kind of bathing in the light of Purim, so we don't like to take it down too soon. We like to enjoy it. I wanted to leave it up so that I could invite you into our banquet hall, so that I could talk about the depths and the meanings and the incredible layers of Purim tonight. So get some hamantashen, sit down, and let's chat about Purim, or Purim as some people say. So I'm actually pretty surprised at how many people don't know about this story in the scriptures. There's actually a commanded feast, or festival actually, that goes along with this story that Queen Esther and Mordecai commanded Israel to keep annually. They would remember actually what Yahovah had done for them at this time. Through the bravery of Queen Esther, through Mordecai, through the prayers of Israel, the genocide against Yahovah's people, the family of Judah, the tribe of Judah, it didn't happen. The enemy's plans turned on themselves instead of on Israel in poetic justice. So you find the story of Esther in the scriptures, but you also find it in the Apocrypha. So this is the King James version of the Apocrypha, and in here you have the rest of the chapters of the book of Esther. One of the really cool things that I like in there is that Queen Esther, when she actually goes before the king, she faints. That's not in our scriptures. That's not the picture it paints in the scriptures. So in the Apocrypha, basically the king is very stern when she comes in, and she's scared, and then Yahovah changes the attitude of his heart towards her, and she faints, and he leaps forward and holds her in his arms, and his heart is moved towards her in favor of her, so that he doesn't kill her. He ends up putting the scepter out. So it is kind of amusing to me that not too many people, even Christians, don't know too much about this story. Isaac and I named our youngest daughter Hadassah after Queen Esther. Queen Esther is one of two women in the scriptures that I love the most, and there are so many people that say, oh, that's a beautiful name, what does it mean? They don't know what it means. They don't know where this comes from, her name comes from. Which is very sad, because it is an incredibly beautiful story in the scriptures, one that we need to take heed of, one that we need to understand, and as believers really look at the depths and the parallels of this story in order to see what it means for us today. Because Purim is actually very personal, and we're going to talk about that just a little bit later. So I'm going to just nutshell this story for you if you don't know much about the story of Purim yet. But I encourage you to go read it yourself. Open up your scriptures and read it, and get the Apocrypha and read it as well. So about 500 years before Yahshua came and was born, Hasatan had kind of created the situation where he was planning to genocide the Jews, the tribe of Judah. Had he been able to do that, then the line of Judah to the Messiah would have been cut off. And so the story of Purim is so incredible because that didn't happen. The plans of the enemy were foiled and turned against them, and the line of Judah continued on so that the Messiah could come. But basically 500 years before he came as a baby, there was this little girl named Hadassah who was orphaned, and her cousin Mordecai, who lived in Persia, came to get her and adopted her and raised her in Persia. And it happens to be there's this huge intrigue at the court in the palace. So you have the Persian king who has a queen who will not show up to his banquet so he can show off her beauty. You have there's so many layers in here. They're really cool to talk about in a minute. But basically, he was throwing a huge banquet that lasted for 180 days, and he had invited all the noblemen and satraps and all these people who were at elevated rank all over his 127 provinces, basically the then known world. He had invited them to this party for this huge amount of time, and he wanted to show off his treasure. So the king's glory is his bride, is his queen. She refused. Her name is Vashti, so she refused, and upon the advice and counsel of his advisors, Memucan and a few others, he disposes Queen Vashti, and in the end he ends up accepting their advice to find another virgin in the country and elevate her to queen in place of Vashti. So in the events unfolding, Hadassah is chosen to become part of the harem. Now, I highly doubt that she wanted to do this. In fact, in the Apocrypha, when you read her prayer, she says that she had no joy since the day she was taken from Mordecai, and she despised the crown on her head, and she only wore it in public when she had to, but she never wore it in private. I'm sure that she was taken, not who wants to sign up for a beauty contest and be queen. I'm sure that the girls were all taken once they spent they had all this huge amount of treatment for a long period of time before they went in to meet the king for their one night with the king. And if the girl pleased him and he called for her by name, then that girl was the one that could or would be queen. Hadassah, when she got taken, Mordecai changed her name to Esther, which is actually Ishtar, the goddess of fertility, and in that land no one would have suspected that she was Jewish with that name. So he told her also to not reveal that she was a Jew. So eventually she ends up going for her one night with the king, and he ends up choosing her to be queen, calls her by name. Hadassah is now made Queen Esther over the Persian Empire. So as time passes in the palace, then it's actually not happening within 1 week or a month of her time in the palace. This is actually years later, as intrigue kind of escalates in the palace. You have Haman rising to become in power in the Persian Empire, kind of coming next to the king, and demands that everyone bow down to him, but one man will not, and that is Mordecai will not, who works in the palace gate. Well, this enrages Haman, and Haman's actually a descendant of Amalek, and so he's a descendant of Esau, and there's all this hate that's always been and has been until Yahovah destroys them for good, as he promises he will wipe out the memory of them for good. But during this time, they are there still, and Haman is actually there because King Saul did not do his job. His first job as king was to destroy all of the Amalekites, and he did not do this. So had King Saul done his job and been obedient by destroying all of the Amalekites, who were the ancestors of the Agagites, of which Haman was a descendant of, all descendants from Esau, had Saul done his job, his very first job when he became king was Papa said, destroy all of them. He didn't do all that. He didn't do that. So because he didn't do that, then we have Haman. Who has this deep-seated hate for Israel, for Jacob. So here you have this man rising into power. Mordecai is making him mad because he won't bow to him, and Mordecai will only bow to Yahovah. and not to a human, and ends up throughout the course of intrigue in the palace with Bigatha and Teresh plotting against the king, and Mordecai finding out and warning the queen, who then went to the king, and he investigated and found out that these two were going to just kill the king, poison the king, and that all was written down in a scroll. There's so much intrigue. It's a really awesome story. It's full, and there's all kinds of like things going on, but so Haman decides that killing Mordecai isn't enough. He must basically destroy the entire nation of Jews, or Judah. And so he ends up selling the king on this idea that there's a small group of people who are not keeping the king's laws, that they have their own laws, and that they need to be destroyed. Well, the king, in some weird stupor, gives him his signet ring, and gives Haman the signet ring that can basically make laws. So Haman, well, he goes to his priests, and they throw the pour, which is why it's named Purim. They throw the pour, they throw the dice to decide when the genocide would happen, which ends up being on Adar 13. And, the lot fell on Adar 13, which happened to be 12 months from the moment that pour was thrown, which is amazing, because it meant that the Jews would have 12 months to plan, for Papa to have time to work a plan out of redemption for them. So it ends up that Haman has the scribes write the death decree in all different languages. Couriers take it out to the far parts of the 127 provinces of King Ahasuerus, and the entire city, the entire area was completely bewildered about what had just happened. So the death sentence was over their heads. Mordecai finds out about this. He starts mourning with sackcloth and ashes in the city gate. The queen finds out about it, and she sends him clothes. He doesn't want those. He sends her a message back that says, basically, you need to go before the king and beg for the lives of yourself and your people. And if you don't, then Yahovah will raise up someone else to do this, but you and your family will perish. So, but perhaps you have been put here in this palace for such a time as this. Powerful lines in all the story. One of the most powerful lines in all of humanity, you know, all of the history of Israel, I think, is this line that Mordecai crafts and sends to her. Who knows that for such a time as this? Who knows that you have been brought to the palace for such a time as this? Who knows? Maybe you have been brought to your situation wherever you are for such a time as this. Oh, if I could just remember that sometimes. This is why we do the festivals and the feasts, so that every year I remember. Oh yes, okay. So that we remember you've been brought here perhaps for such a time as this. It ends up that Queen Esther, she doesn't want to do it at first. She's very terrified. She knows that she hasn't been called by the king for 30 days, so she feels like she's falling out of favor with the king. And going before the king without being invited is basically instant death. So she was terrified, I'm sure. There's tons of fear. I mean, the Apocrypha talks about in her prayer that she asked to be delivered out of her fear. So she requests that Mordecai and all of Israel fast for 3 days and 3 nights. She would do the same, and then on that 3rd day she would go before the king. During that time, she's praying, she's fasting, she's humbling herself greatly before the king, Yahweh, and she is inquiring of the Ruach, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And she gets up off the floor after prostrating herself before Yahweh, and she has an idea. And her idea is to throw a banquet, to don up in all her splendor and go before the king to invite him to a banquet. And it ends up she does. She goes before the king, and like the Apocrypha talks about, she comes before the king and his majesty and everything just scared, just the fear that it puts in her, because she felt like, you know, her life was it was gone. She had forfeited her life. She says, if I perish, I perish. I think she really expected to perish. But the king looks at her the Apocrypha says very, harshly, and she faints. And Yahovah changes his heart towards her in that moment, and he leaps off his throne and he puts her in his arms, and basically he says, what is your request? Up to half my kingdom is yours. And she invites him and Haman to a banquet that she has prepared in her quarters. So then they come to this banquet, have a great time. He says, what is your request? And she says that you come to a second banquet the next day, and then I will tell you my request. So between those two banquets, you have this drama with Haman and Mordecai and the king. The king can't sleep that night, so he calls in the scribe. The scribe reads the story, the chronicles of the king's reign, and he happens to read, of course, by divine appointment, he reads the part that says, that the life of the king was in danger by Rebekah and Teresh, and it was revealed to the king by Mordecai. And so Mordecai basically saved the life of the king. The king is like, did I do anything to honor him, to thank him? And the scribe said no. And so Haman was in the court at that point, that time of night, to see if he could ask the king if he could hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had built right in front of his house. Lawn decorations, I guess. I don't know. But the king spoke first and said, what should I do to honor a man who has saved my life? And Haman thought he was talking about him. So the king is like asking Haman this, and Haman's like, well, I think you should put him on a horse or donkey or whatever that you have ridden, put your robe on him, and parade him through the streets proclaiming, this is how the king, this is what is done for the king, whom the king delights to honor, or something like that. And then the king said, okay, go do that for Mordecai. And of course, Haman is completely undone. He is like mortified, but he goes and heads and does it. He comes home, he's distraught, but while he's in his frenzy of a distraught with telling his wife about what had happened, the queen's servants come, and they request that he come back to her palace for the second banquet. So they're going to get him for the second banquet. And so in that second banquet, the king finally says, what is your request? Up to half my kingdom. And she finally says, I would like to beg for my life. And he's like, well, your life, you're safe, and she said, the life of myself and my people, yada yada yada. She points to Haman. Haman is just going to destroy the Jews. Mordecai, who happens to be my kin. And the king gets furious. He gets completely furious. He leaves the room to think about this. Haman knows that he's pretty much a goner at that point, but he starts begging with Queen Esther for his life. I love the Apocrypha when it talks about how there's room in the Hebrew words in the story and the rest of the books of the rest of the chapters of the book of Esther in the Apocrypha that say that perhaps it leaves room to believe that the angels actually lifted him and pinned him on Queen Esther, so that when the king came back, it would force him to execute Haman right there, right on the spot, because it looked like he was trying to molest the queen. So I think that's a really cool visual of the angels picking him up and forcing him down on Queen Esther and keeping him there until the king came back from the garden. And at that moment, the soldiers put the hood over Haman, took him off, and hung him on the very gallows that Haman had built for Mordecai. So poetic justice throughout this whole entire story. The enemy of the Jews had been hung, but the problem was, at this point, was that no law that the king had made could be revoked. So Haman had made this law with the king's ring, and it couldn't be revoked. So the death sentence couldn't be revoked. So what happened was, if you don't know already, I'm sure that most of you do who are watching this, but it's fun to tell. It's a fun story to tell. I'm trying to wrap my brain around it all. And it's a tired brain from this whole week, that's for sure. The king elevated Mordecai to the position that Haman had, and he gives the signet ring to Mordecai. And Mordecai and Queen Esther then craft a second decree that went side by side, this death decree that said that the Judah could fight for their lives on Adar 13th. So he couldn't revoke the Adar 13th death decree, but they made a counter decree of life so they could fight for their life on that day. Well, when that day came, Adar 13 came, the king up to that point had sent several letters out to all his 127 provinces and said, please fight alongside of the Jews, don't fight against them. If I find out that you fought against them, then I will come and destroy your city. So a lot of nobles, a lot of ambassadors and satraps and governors and stuff, they all joined Mordecai and the Jews because they actually feared Mordecai at that point. So on that day the fighting began. So on the 13th of Adar they fought, and there was something like 70,000 of the enemies of Judah were destroyed that day. King comes back to Queen Esther and says, you know, what else is your request? Do you want anything else? She says, I'd like one more day of fighting in Susa to make sure that all the enemies of my people are gone. So they fought one more day on Adar 14, and 800 more, I believe, 800 in Susa, I think. Anyways, total of 800 in Susa, I think, that were enemies of the Jews were destroyed. So you have the fighting on Adar 13th, and so the people in the outlying areas celebrated Purim on the 14th, so they rested and they rejoiced on the 14th. But then you had the ones in Susa that had continued to fight on 14th. They rested and celebrated on the 15th. So that's why you have two Purim dates. You have Purim, and then you have Shushan Purim, because that's where the fighting happened on that second day of Purim. It's a really amazing story. Queen Esther and Mordecai commanded that all of Israel remember, or that the Jews there, Judah, remember what Yahovah had done for them by celebrating Purim. By, I think it's 4 things. Have a feast, give gifts of food to each other, give to the poor, and rejoice. Those are the 4 requirements that Queen Esther and Mordecai wrote up for everyone to do for the day of Purim. Interesting too is that one thing that you may not know, that in the Apocrypha it says that King Yahovah sent out letters to his provinces and to all 127 provinces, which is basically the then known world, commanding them all to keep Purim and to remember what Yahweh had done for Israel, for the Jews. And what's interesting is people who say that, well, I don't need to celebrate Purim because I'm not a Jew, need to really relook at that command. And because you don't see the command of the king in the scriptures, but in the Apocrypha you see the prayer of the king, and you see the letters that went out to his provinces from the king, and one of those was commanding all 127 provinces to celebrate Purim. Now, one really interesting fact about that is that at that point the dispersion of the 10 tribes had already happened, so they were already out, scattered, and so when he makes his proclamation for all his provinces, that's where all the Israelites were. So all of Israel should be celebrating Purim because it's commanded for all of Israel. So of course Purim is not a commanded feast that we find in the Torah, in the covenant, but it is a commanded festival for Israel to remember the ways of Yahovah, to remember what Yahovah has done for us, for Israel. And that is really the point of all of these feasts and festivals, is to remember. Remember how Yahovah says all the time, remember, remember, remember. Don't forget what I've done for you. So for Papa to have put Queen Esther and Mordecai in such a position for such a time as that, to establish this festival of Purim for all of Israel to remember what Papa has done, this is really an amazing thing. And to snub our nose at it is not cool, because there are so many depths and so many layers to the story. So let me get going on that and start to unpack this a little bit so that you see what it means for you and me and why it's so important to celebrate. Because Purim is actually so much more than, you know, just dressing up and having pageants and how do they celebrate it now? You know, there's not too much depth to it. They rehearse the story, but there's so many prophetic things going on in this story that are applicable for us today that I know that Papa put it there for us. I know that he wants us to celebrate this because of what it brings up and what he wants to talk about during Purim. If you haven't watched Jim Staley's videos about Purim, you really should, because he's got some incredible insight into this festival. And one of the things he talks about is the parallels between. So I'm going to read just a few of the parallels that Jim Staley has found in the story of Purim. And let me just read them to you because they're incredible. And then we'll talk about a couple of them that I think are really cool, really incredible, and I think my glasses are dirty, but anyway. So King Ahasuerus represents the great King Yahweh, okay? Queen Vashti represents disobedient Israel who despises Yahovah's royal law and does things her own way. Who does that sound like? Who does that sound like? Despises the law and does things her own way. So Queen Vashti's own party in her own palace represents rebellious Israel throwing her own feast instead of attending Yahweh's feasts. So she's called to come actually on the 7th day of the banquet, and she won't come. Yeah, isn't that amazing? So Vashti is actually called, rebellious Israel is called to come on the 7th day of his feast, and she won't come. Sounds like a lot of people I know who will not show up to Shabbat, and they want to do things their own way. They want to keep Sunday instead of Shabbat. And the king is asking us to keep Shabbat and show up on Shabbat. And so much of Scattered Israel is in Christianity, and they snub their nose at Yahweh's 7th day command. And they will not show up. This is rebellious Israel. The request of the king for Vashti to appear before his guests represent Yahweh's desire to show his bride, Israel, and the splendor that he gave her. Okay, so a king wants to show off his splendor. He's going to show off his queen. He's going to show the nations what he has adorned his queen with. You know, all the diamonds and the rubies and the pearls and all the sparkly stuff and everything that he's lavished on her. He wants to show that off to the nations to say, look what kind of king I am. Look at my generosity. Look at how I adorn my queen. You know, that's his splendor, is his queen. Not himself, but his queen. And she will allow the king to show her off. And I just want you to know that my idea and understanding of all of this has changed over the course of the years, because I didn't realize this before. A lot of Purims that we threw, I had different understanding of Queen Vashti's role in this. But when I heard Jim Staley's 2014 video teaching on Purim, I was incredibly moved and thought, wow, I mean, he has eyes, he had eyes to see and ears to hear, and I was still lacking, and now I have those same eyes, so I want to share them with my audience. So here we go. The 7 advisors, or wise men to the king. So they represent the 7 spirits of Yahovah that are near to the throne. The wise men knew the king's law and how to interpret it. They had access to the king, and so those wise men that were around the king, the advisors who were advising him throughout the course of all this different things that were happening in the story, they had access to the king. They had access to the king. And so this represents the idea that to have access to the king, to Yahweh, we must know his law, and we must know how to interpret his law. So, what more do I say? That's so cool. If you want access to the king, you must know his law, and you must know how to interpret his law. Disposing of Vashti and the search for a new queen or a new bride. This represents Yahweh's divorce, when he divorces Israel and looks for a new covenant bride, Israel's children. Okay, so he disposes Vashti, just like Yahovah disposes Israel. He ends up divorcing her in Hosea. He divorces her, and he begins to look for a new bride. And that new bride is the new covenant bride that, you know, we're now grafted in. We're through the kinsman redeemer, we get to be his bride. So, see what I mean? I wrote this down last year. You have to write things down. You have to video things. You have to like try to keep things so that next year you can remember, because as John Eldridge says, we are the queen and king of forgetting. You know, that's our worst enemy, is to forget. And one thing I want to put here, oh wait, no, it's coming. Okay. Haggai. So remember, Haggai is in charge of all the maidens. Haggai actually was the one that Queen Esther asked and said, what does the king like? I don't know what he likes. I will wear whatever you tell me to wear, Haggai, so that I please the king. So Haggai represents the Ruach HaKodesh. So now what we do, and I'm going to show you my Purim paper doll in a little bit, my word picture for my girls, and I hope you really like it. I think you're gonna love it. So you got to stick around so you can see this. But basically, that Haggai represents the Ruach HaKodesh. So now we ask the Ruach, what does the king like? And I will wear whatever he likes. That I will wear. So we inquired, Queen Esther inquired of Haggai as to what the king liked, and she wore that, and she won his favor. We inquire of the Ruach HaKodesh, what does the king like? We wear that, and we get his favor. Okay, so then Queen Esther represents, of course, the obedient bride who actually fears the king. So she wants to please the king, but she fears the king. And that the scripture says this all over the scriptures, that we shouldn't fear man, but we should actually fear Yahovah, Yahweh. We should fear our creator. And fear, actually, I don't think it's a bad thing. It means you respect, you're more worried about what Yahovah might end up doing than what man will do. So you fear. So this bride, the good bride, Esther, feared the king, just like we are to fear Yahweh. Esther inquires of Haggai what the king likes. So already talked about that. The Ruach HaKodesh shows us what Yahweh likes, what kind of ornaments that he wants us to wear. And I'm going to show you that in my doll in a little bit. Esther prepares to go before the king. We spend our lives preparing to meet the king. We need to be spotless, without wrinkle, and we need to adorn ourselves with what pleases the king. That's cool. So Esther inquires of Haggai as to what the king likes, but she prepares, so Esther prepares to go before the king. And that's what we spend our entire life doing. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Our entire life is preparing to meet the king. That's what Purim is about, honestly. That's the heart of Purim. The heart of Purim is preparing to meet the king. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. Some more. No one was allowed to just appear before the king. They had to be invited. So, likewise with us, we have to be invited in. So we're chosen to choose. We're invited. That doesn't mean everyone's going to show up, but we're invited. Esther faints at the sight of the king in all his splendor. This represents, you look forward, when every knee will bow at the sight of the king's splendor. When he comes, and when we see Yahshua, when we see Yahweh. The king's scepter. This represents grace, meaning that a way has been made to live. Now this isn't sloppy grace. Grace covers what you did before, and it makes a way for you not to sin anymore. So the idea is to go and sin no more, not to go keep sinning and my grace is going to continue to cover you. No, that's sloppy grace. Grace is that a way has been made for you to not sin anymore, to stop sinning and walk that narrow path and get to the happily ever after. That is what it means. So that scepter was held out to Queen Esther because a way has been made. The king had a law, and the law was that if you come before him uninvited, you would die. But the way that was made was he could actually, around that was he could hold the scepter out to anybody that came uninvited, and that person could live. So that is grace. That scepter is grace. A way has been made. Haman and his command for all to bow to him represent the adversary, Hasatan, who wants everyone to bow to him. Of course, that's pretty simple. So Haman is representative of Hasatan. So Haman's decree of death. We must all die because we've all broken the royal law. So Haman's decree of death there represents the fact that we have all died, so we all deserve to die because we have all broken his, Yahweh's royal law, his everlasting royal law. So Esther fasts and prays for 3 days and 3 nights, and fasting is actually a symbol of dying. Yahshua was actually, he was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. So how prophetic is that? She fasts and prays for 3 days and 3 nights. All of Israel does. Yahshua was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. Fasting is a form of dying. And Yahshua was in the grave and dead for 3 days and 3 nights. There's a huge parallel right there. And just on a side note, when you also want to know what our Rabbi Yahshua says about the feast, you have to get this book, the chronological gospels. I just can't tell you how good this book is. You look and you find out where he was, where Yahshua, our Rabbi Yahshua, was during Purim, and you find out that he actually raised Lazarus from the dead on Purim. He waited. So remember the story? Like Martha and Miriam sent messengers to Yahshua to say Lazarus is dead, come quickly, and Yahshua ends up waiting, and he waits until the day of Purim to come and raise Lazarus from the dead. So 3 days and 3 nights. Esther goes into the Holy of Holies on the 3rd day. Yahshua presents himself to the King Yahovah on the 3rd day, which is first fruits. So on the 3rd day, so she's fasting and praying for 3 days and 3 nights, and on the 3rd day she gets up, puts on her royal robes, and dolls herself up to go before the king. So she presents herself before the king at the end of that 3 days and 3 nights of fasting, of being basically in a death position. And Yahshua was in the grave, dead for 3 days and 3 nights, and on that 3rd day, on first fruits, he ascends to Yahovah, to the throne, and does the first waves the first fruit offering before the king. Beautiful. He presents himself before the king on the 3rd day. Esther lays her life down for her people. It's the same thing. Yahshua laid his life down for his people. Okay, so the legal arrangement that Haman enters into with the king represents the legal arrangement Hasatan demands of Yahweh that states we deserve to die because we have broken the royal law. Did you notice that? So there's this legal arrangement that Haman enters into with the king, saying, oh, there's these group of people who don't obey your law. You really need to destroy them. It's this legal arrangement that Hasatan demands of Yahweh to say, hey, there's these people who are breaking your law right and left. They need to die. You break the royal law and you die. I don't know how anybody throws this story out. I don't know why people don't want to celebrate this. It's incredible. Okay, the demise of Haman. The scheme, it represents the schemes of the wicked will be turned upon themselves, and their fate will be what they had intended for the bride. It's poetic justice for sure. He schemed against Mordecai, built the gallows for Mordecai, but actually he himself was hung on the very gallows that he built for Mordecai. So the schemes of the wicked will be turned on themselves. What Hasatan intends for the bride will actually be something that he experiences instead of us and the evil and all the other evil people with him and demons. Haman's 10 sons were hanged. In 1946, Hitler's 10 men were hung, and one of them yells out, Purim Fest 1946. So obviously he saw the connection between Purim and Hitler and all of that. The king's law cannot be revoked. The royal law is everlasting, and there is a death penalty for breaking it, and that cannot be revoked even by Yahovah, even by Yahweh. So anybody, no matter how much he loves you, if you break that law, the death penalty hangs over your head, my head. But he's done everything he can to make a way for you to be saved. So there's another incredible parallel. Every one of these parallels, I mean, you could spend hours and days studying and feasting on. In fact, we have. I mean, this is part of the journey of celebrating the festivals and the feasts of Yahovah every year throughout the rest of your life, is that you can eat of all this. This is why I have all this, is because it's from years and years of study, of understanding, and so you know, it doesn't all come at once. I'm kind of hitting y'all at once right now, but if you were to study this on your own to gain all this yourself, I mean, it comes slow. You want to sit with it and enjoy it and eat of it and let it soak into you. Anyway, the counter decree of life that was arranged by Queen Esther and Mordecai. This is so amazing in the story. This is one of the other major points to the story. You have this decree of death, but you have this counter decree of life that is done. So on the same post, nailed to that post, is here's this decree of death, and then here is this decree of life. It's the same thing in our life. We have this decree of death hanging over our heads, and here's this decree of life that Yahovah has gone to a lot of work. Him, Yahshua, the Ruach HaKodesh, the family of Elohim, Yahovah Elohim, they have gone to a ton of work to get this life decree, this counter decree of life, posted right beside this death decree. But you have to fight for your life, because on Adar 13th, it wasn't just a given that they were going to be okay. They had to actually fight against the people who hated them. So the decree of life is in front of us to choose, is that we have to fight for it. You just don't sit around and just say, oh, life is coming to me. You know, you have to actually fight, because death is coming at you, because Hasatan is coming at you, the demons are coming at you, and you have to fight. And all this religious spirit and yuck is trying to grab you and take you down. You have to fight, and you have to say, no, there's a command here that says I get to fight for my life, and I'm going to fight because I want to live. That's the whole thing about this story, is it's a celebration of life, not death. And it's a celebration of destruction of enemies of Yahovah and of Israel. Alright, so Yahweh hid his name in the book of Esther, which represents that he wants others to see his glory through his bride. So the glory of Yahovah is his people, his bride, you know. It's revealed in his people. His glory is revealed in his people. So he is hidden and concealed in this book, in our scriptures, because he wants his glory to be seen through his people, through his bride. Do you shine? What dress are you wearing? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. So there's some incredible parallels to this story that make Purim so important to celebrate and rehearse and remember throughout the years. So as a recap, I just want to remind you of the most important things to remember about the story of Purim and how it applies to you and me. And the first thing is that Yahweh came through for his people. The second thing is that, and he will again. He is and he will again. The second thing is that there were two brides. One is rebellious and one is obedient. One wants to show up to the feast days, her own feast days, and the other one will show up when he's asking her to show up. Incredibly important. The third thing is that Purim is all about how to get dressed to meet the king, how to prepare to meet the king, and we need to be asking the Ruach HaKodesh, what does the king like? And I will wear that to meet the king, because I want to please the king, because I want to get to the happily ever after that he has planned for me. So I want to just show you a few things that I do for Purim, and I'll just show you one thing at a time. So when we throw a Purim party, we actually call it a Purim dinner theater, because we sit around this lovely table, noshing and eating a whole bunch of really neat Persian food. But during that time when we're eating, first we talk about what Purim is about before we actually do the play. So the Purim spiel. So before we get to that, I have a little magnet board, and on that magnet board, which I'm going to get a couple things off of. So on that magnet board, that piece of metal basically that's hanging over here that you can't see, I have little cues basically that help everyone in the room participate. So I put this on top, Purim is about, and then I have handed out to everyone their own piece of the puzzle, and I give them a little bit moment to reflect on what this has to do with the story, and then they come up and put this up on the board, and then they talk about it a little bit and tell us what they think, how this relates. So let's see, where's that? I don't know where the other one is, but like here, it's about being chosen, right? We've kind of talked about that a little bit. So somebody would come up and talk about how that relates to the story. Poetic justice, we talked about that. You and I have tonight. It's also about, it's not just a story about the Jews or Judah, it's a story about Amalek. So a story about how King Saul did not do what he was supposed to do, and about their history and their story. It's also about Yahweh's provision, right? So I hand this to somebody and they talk about what they see as Yahweh's provision in the story. It's about repenting, right? And look at the prayers of Queen Esther and Mordecai are pretty amazing to know what it is, how we need to be how we need to be praying, actually. One of my favorites to discuss during Purim, doing beautiful in the middle of hard. So if you look at this story, the idea that Queen Esther threw a banquet in the middle of a death sentence over her own head. I mean, can you imagine the grief and the fear that was going on through? I mean, talk about butterflies and talk about a sick feeling in your gut. And at the same time, this calmness that surpasses all understanding, I'm sure she had. But at the same time, the fear of not knowing if you were going to make it out of that, you know, throne room alive or not, must have been just so present in her while she was actually preparing a feast. So in the middle of war, of which we are in right now, we are supposed to be throwing feasts for Papa. That is what we do, and that is what is so incredibly ironic about this story. If you look at our life too, she did beautiful in the midst of hard. She dolled up. She got so beautiful. She wanted to win the king's heart with her beauty, and she did. And we are supposed to do the same thing. We're supposed to do, if you feel like you're doing crazy things in the middle of hard, that you're trying to throw a banquet in the middle of hard, you're trying to throw these amazing feasts and festivals of Yahovah in the middle of hard, then you're right on track, because that is exactly what's happening right now. I've done it. I've done it in a teepee. I've done it, you know, in an RV. This is not what it's always looked like. Okay, people, this is years and years of it coming together right here and having the space to do it. There's many times that I never had this kind of space to do it. So, but I still honored this festival and all the other festivals in the middle of hard. So doing beautiful in the middle of hard is what this story is about as well. So this Purim is about knowing the king's law and how to interpret it, right? We talked about that a bit. So you know the royal law and you know how to interpret it. Awesome. Because knowing the law will get you into the presence of the king. Okay, Then we have the death decree and the counter decree of life, which we already talked about, right? Death decree from Haman or from Hasatan on us. Decree of life. What Mordecai and Queen Esther crafted for the Jews to live, and what Yahovah, Yahshua, and the Rock have just miraculously done in order to give us a way to live. This story is also about preserving the line of Judah. Otherwise, had the genocide happened, then there wouldn't have been the line of Judah for the king to come through. It was prophesied that the Messiah would come through the line of Judah, and had the line been destroyed and totally wiped out, that prophecy wouldn't have been able to come true. So Yahovah preserved the line of Judah. And then history. Yes, Purim is history of our family, Israel's family. So if you say, well, I'm not a Jew and I don't need to celebrate, well, remember that the 127 provinces were commanded to, which all of Scattered Israel was in. So if you are curious about the feast and festivals of Yahovah, and you're kind of moving this way, moving out of Babylon, then you are one of those 10 scattered tribes, and you need to be celebrating this feast and this festival of Purim. It's history. It's our family's history. We're part of the family. 12 tribes make family. We're family. It's our history. All right, and then finally, Purim is about how to prepare to come before the king. So I'm going to touch on that in a minute when I get to my doll. But before I do that, I want to show you a few other things I do to celebrate Purim. So I want to show you a few things that we also do for Purim at our dinner theater. One of the things I do is I pass around this book, and it's just a homemade thing I made. And we write in prayers of repentance. So I choose to do, most of the years, I choose to do a fast. I think it's called Teni Esther. I do a fast of 3 days and 3 nights right before Purim, and I break the fast at the dinner theater, which probably isn't a crazy good idea because of all the feast food, and it's kind of heavy and it goes in, but nevertheless, that's what I do because I want to enter into how Queen Esther was feeling as she prepared her banquet. So I get a really good inside look at that when I'm fasting and preparing the food for the banquet. And I'm sure she didn't actually prepare the food, but nevertheless, I like to enter that with her. But then I write a prayer of repentance for myself, for Israel, and I ask everyone in the room if they feel moved to do likewise. So this is a really cool idea. I like to hand out or put up or give away the prayer of Queen Esther because I love this prayer. I think it is just an amazing prayer, and so sometimes I will, have a little gift to give away to people. Sometimes I give those gifts away after a quiz. So I actually have a Purim quiz, which I will have some of this stuff on my store someday for sale. I hope if you're watching this and it's years later after I've done this video, go to my store, go to teshuvahministries.com, and you'll find a store there. And hopefully by then I will have all this stuff for you to buy and have for your Purim party if you choose to do it like I do, or at least it will help you with yours. But there's a Purim quiz that I print and pass out to people, and they can work in teams and do this, or they can do it by themselves, or we just go through it together. But it kind of helps people understand some details about the story that they didn't necessarily know, or refreshes their mind. So this is a really cool thing to do. Of course, I have coloring books for the kids at most of the feasts. So one of them here is a Purim coloring book, and then I found online I found a actual comic strip for the teenagers of Purim, and I thought this was a really cool comic strip, a Queen Esther, of the story of Queen Esther and Haman and all that. So it makes for a really good comic strip, that's for sure. So I have some coloring books for the kids. And also we serve Persian food. So one of the things with the feast and the festivals, and one of the things I'm starting to do in our workshops is go through this stuff a little more intimately in the workshops that I'm doing for each feast. And Ladies of Teshuvah, if you've seen that, go be a part of that. Go join that Facebook group and get me out to your place. I want to teach Scattered Israel, the women of Scattered Israel, how to be ladies of Teshuvah and what that means and looks like, what repentance looks like on a woman. So one of the things that we talk about in the workshops is the food, you know, how you invite the senses into the experience of the feasts and festivals of Yahovah so that it impresses upon your children the ways of Yahovah. So we've done this for Christmas and all the other things in our pagan past. Now what we do is we take all that energy and we move it to Papa's ways, and we do that with all our hearts. So some of the things that we make for Purim is a pomegranate cooler. It's a Persian pomegranate cooler with orange blossom water in it. It's really good. We do rose water cookies with pistachios and hamantash and fig and apricot and prune hamantash with a little orange zest in the dough. It's so amazing. We do herbed feasting rice, kind of like a jeweled rice that has, you know, cranberries and golden raisins and almonds and cardamom and cinnamon. Is just, oh, lovely. Then we do kreplach. We did soup kreplach this year with a broth kind of thing. Some other years I bake it and it puffs up and it gets all chewy and, you know, really wonderful, dipped in tzatziki sauce or naan in tzatziki sauce, a lot of grapes and things like that. So, and we do one other really cool thing, poppy seed candy. This is a it's called monlach. It's really, really old, ancient candy that is traditional for Purim back in the old days, I guess. So it's got poppy seeds and honey and walnuts and got some coated in cornstarch, or not cornstarch, yeah, cornstarch. Anyway, so good. You either love it or you hate it. So, but when my girls taste this, they're like, oh, it's Purim, because I don't serve this any other time except at Purim. So this and the hamantash and the rosewater cookies are special for Purim, because when they taste it, then they're like, oh, that's the time of year it is. So one of the other things we do is we do a Purim spiel, and that is basically the play. It's an act, you basically act it out. So for us, we do, because I never know who's actually coming, and I don't have a steady crowd that joins us for the feast. So I have scripts, which I'll make available on our website sometime, that that Isaac and I have crafted for all the different characters. I give a script out to Haman and to Mordecai and to Queen Esther and everything, and then there's a narrator part, and the narrator reads, and the people act it out like that, like spontaneous, so it's impromptu, and there's all kinds of fun things that happen when you're spontaneous like that, and it gets a lot of, everybody loves it. And of course we do the groggers when the name Haman is mentioned, like normal, and is tradition to make noise when Haman's name is mentioned, and when Mordecai's mentioned, everybody screams yay. So very fun tradition that our brother does. For the play, I give everyone gets, like, who's in the play gets one part of a costume, because we don't have like tons of money to put into costumes. So like Haman would wear the Haman's hat, and then the king has the scepter, the Cinderella scepter. It's just the way it is. And he gets the ring that, I don't know if you can see that, but boom, there it goes, it's on. Do you see that? Boom. So he gets this is the signet ring. So very fun things. And then one of the other things is I have the Megillah that I created. It tells a story, and it has a ton of the different things that we've just talked about in here. And so they can go home and they can read. I think it's a 42-inch Megillah. And I'll have this available on our website as well. But I send these home with my guests so that they can sit in bed and read and have it for next year, so that they don't ever forget what Purim is about. But you can buy this. I'm not giving it to you. You can buy it. Okay. And one of the other things that I have done is, of course, on some of the other videos you've seen, I've done a feast poster. So basically, it just keeps me online, keeps us on track as to what the proclamation was, a feast brief, which has expanded over the years, honestly, as I've learned about this festival. It's got the deep heart of it and the Messianic news right here. And then the traditions. So I want my kids and my family to remember what we do for Purim. Because we didn't grow up doing this. So we have to make new traditions and we have to establish them. That means do them all the time, every year. But every year I forget. So there you go. It's right there. And then the foods that we eat. And then there's all different things, you know, like there's Megillah and the, you know, just different parts of the feast and the festival on this poster. And I hang it up on the wall so we remember. Outside of the 10 boxes of Purim decor that we do and for the festival, and outside of the Purim spiel and the dinner theater and all of the food and all the things that we do to enter into this festival with all the understanding what it's about. The last thing I want to leave you with is the deepest part of this festival, and the reason why that I think that you should be celebrating this. I know Queen Esther and Mordecai thought you should be, but I want to say to believers in Yahshua, I want to say to the scattered Israel, to the 10 tribes who don't think that they're a part of Purim or they don't need to celebrate it, and to those Melchizedek priests who have been taught enmity against Purim, I want to challenge you to relook at this and then with new eyes, and I want to show you something that I think is at the heart of Purim. We touched on it a bit, but Purim is about preparing to meet the King. And I'm going to show you how Hanukkah and Purim are related, how all of the feasts are related in, it's incredible, so just bear with me here. So this is a doll that I have made. It's a paper doll to help to illustrate what Purim is about and how everything is kind of related from Hanukkah through Purim, through the spring feast, through Shavuot, through the fall feast, okay? So I will also have this available for you. I gave these away this year to my guests who are here, but someday we will get this manufactured. Okay, so watch. Okay, you ready? Okay. This is Israel. Do you see her? I don't know if you can see her face. No. There she is! This is Israel. This is the bride. Now she has underwear on, so don't freak out, okay? But this is Israel. Now, here is Israel's black heart. I'm going to put it right there. This is Israel with a broken heart, a heart full of idolatry, honestly. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get her from this point to being dressed and prepared to meet the King. All right? So what you do is you go through Hanukkah. Hanukkah is all about cleansing the heart from idolatry, getting the new heart where the Ruach HaKodesh lives, because our hearts, our bodies are a temple. They're a temple for our God, right? And since we've been worshiping idols, our hearts and our bodies have been temples for idolatry, for Hasatan, so other gods besides Yahweh. So what we're going to do is go through Hanukkah, the cleansing process of Hanukkah, and get the new heart, and have our temple be dedicated back to its original purpose. Original purpose to be a house for Yahovah. Not any other idols but Yahovah. So, then you take the black heart. You've gone through Hanukkah. No more black heart. Now you have the heart of flesh. The red heart. The good heart. The noble heart. The heart where the Ruach HaKodesh lives, right? Alright. So then, with the Ruach HaKodesh living in you, remember who the Ruach HaKodesh represented? Is represented by in the story of Purim? Haggai. And what did Queen Esther do? she asked Haggai what the king liked, right? So this other Israel with the black heart was Vashti. I want to do it my way, my time, my feasts, not the seventh day, yada yada. But with the new heart and the rock living in here, who is the guide to Israel, the bride, the betrothed, we now ask the Ruach HaKodesh, what does the king like? And I will wear that. So you can't show up to the king in underwear. So we have to get dressed, right? So we have to take one step before we put the dress on. We have to look at what our Rabbi Yahshua said, that what was the greatest commandment that he said? Love Yahovah with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, all your everything. So that goes right here. So you love Yahovah, Yahweh, with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your everything. That goes on this hand. Okay, hands represent doing. So you're going to love him with your actions. Yes, because your actions speak louder than your words. So if you just give him lip service, ain't gonna fly, ain't gonna cut it. So you want to give him your actions. So love Yahovah with your actions. But Yahshua goes on to say, love others as yourself. So then on this hand, you love others. Okay? So love Yahovah, love others. Yahshua goes on to say that all the law and the prophets hang on these two things. Okay, so you got this hand, love Yahovah, this hand, love others. Where does the hands come from? They come from the shoulders, right? Okay, so here we have love others, love Yahweh, then love others. This is the dress. And this dress is the dress of righteousness. The clean white dress that he wants you to wear to the great wedding feast, right? That you need to be wearing right now. And this hangs, the dress hangs on the shoulders of love Yahovah and love others. Love Yahovah with all your heart and love others as yourself. I love paper dolls. Okay, so now she has the dress, the white dress on, but notice where it's hanging from. So if she didn't have these two shoulders, the dress wouldn't stay on. So Yahshua was saying, Rabbi Yahshua was saying that love Yahovah with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, all your everything, and love others as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two things. This is the law and the prophets. This is the royal law. This is the righteousness that we need to be wearing. This is the right doings that get us into the great wedding feast. So without this dress, you ain't going anywhere into the great wedding feast. So without this dress, Yahshua says in his parable, remember his parable of the wedding feast and the guy who was found without the wedding garments, and he got in somehow without them, and they threw him out into where there was gnashing and weeping of, gnashing of teeth and weeping and gnashing of teeth. Without this dress, that's where you go. Without this dress, you don't get into the great wedding feast. And this dress is righteousness. It's right doings. Okay? So we put this on. But how do you get this dress on? Oh my gosh, it's so cool. Okay, check this out. You went through Hanukkah to get the new heart, get rid of idolatry and get the new heart. You come to Purim to learn about this dress, how to get prepared to meet the king. So you begin to ask the Ruach HaKodesh, what does Papa like? What pleases the king? And you find out it's this white dress of righteousness. So you go into Pesach, which is next, and you get your dress, your filthy dress that you had on before, washed clean in the blood of Yahshua, and it gets whiter than snow, made whiter than snow. And then during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you begin to eat of Yahshua, right? You eat and eat and eat of Yahshua so that you have, check this out. So that you have the glory of Yahovah in you. You want to sparkle and shine. He's gonna want to show you off to the nations. So he's going to put in you because you're eating of Yahshua, you're going to get in you all the kinds of things that Yahshua was. And Yahshua had everything in him, did he not? He pleased Papa, and we want to have Yahshua in us so that we please Papa. So the glory is this little overlay I have here. Yahovah wants to put ornaments on your dress. That's what this little overlay is representative of, is the ornaments that go on your dress. So the ornaments of love, joy, peace, patience, long-suffering, you know, all of those things. And if you read what Yahshua was, what Yahshua wanted to see in his royal priest and his Melchizedek priest, in you and in me, you come up with like over 300 and some things that are ornaments. So when you eat of Yahshua during unleavened bread, you get the you get the sparkles, you get the things that are on your dress that Yahovah wants to put on your dress so that he can show you off to the nations. Cool, huh? So then you have the sparkles on your dress, you get the ornaments on your dress through eating of Yahshua, right? And that leads you to Shavuot, which at Shavuot is all about entering into covenant with you know, your bridegroom. So you'll say I do, and and you get the ketubah, and so you enter into this covenant so that it's a done deal, so that you're sure, so that it's like, you know, the legal things are done, so that you can actually show up on Yom Teruah to meet the king. So on Yom Teruah, you're prepared. At that point, you're prepared to meet the king, which then after that, on Yom Kippur, you get your acquittal stone. It's a totally done deal. All, you know, in Yom Kippur, the court in heaven is open, and it is a done deal. You have the last name of Yahovah Elohim through betrothal to his son, who's the kinsman redeemer, Yahshua HaMashiach. And then on Sukkot, then you live together. And on Shemini, you have the consummation of, oh my gosh, isn't that the coolest thing? Look at that. See how Purim is so essential in this whole thing? Hanukkah, new heart. Idolatry gone, new heart. Purim, then you begin to ask the Ruach HaKodesh what pleases the king. I want to get dressed like that. Pesach, get your righteousness, your right doing, get in line with Papa, you get your dress washed in the blood of Yahshua. Unleavened bread, you begin to eat of Yahshua so that he gets in you, so that you are now ornated with the glory of Yahovah, so that he can now show you off to the nations when you show up at Shavuot in front of him and Yahshua, to engage in that covenant relationship. And then you are then prepared to meet the king on Yom Teruah, who will come in the clouds one day, and you get to meet him on Yom Teruah. And then on Yom Kippur, it is sealed, done deal, everything is illegally done. Then you get to go live together during Sukkot, and on Shemini, it is intimacy with your king, intimacy with your bridegroom. The cycle of the feast, the yearly annual cycle, is that not the most beautiful thing in the world? I mean, in Revelation, it says in Revelation that she was given clothing of fine linen bright and pure, for the fine linen she wears is the righteous acts of the saints, the right doings of the saints. Oh, this is where I think the beauty of Purim comes out. When you see the lineup, you see the yearly cycle of all the feasts and festivals, and how important Purim is in this, to ask the Ruach HaKodesh what pleases the king. And then you can enter the spring feasts properly, knowing what those spring feasts are for personally. There's a corporate reason that they exist. There's a very personal reason they exist. And so Papa wants to invite you into the cleansing of Hanukkah, the Ruach showing you what pleases him during Purim, and the whole process of the spring feast, which will give you the kind of clothing, the dress, that is the garments that are going to get you into the great wedding feast. And Shavuot, you'll be ready. Isn't that so beautiful? So I will have these dolls for sale on my website in the future. So what a wonderful festival for Israel to celebrate. I hope that you have enjoyed this little basics video. It is a basics, definitely not completely thorough by any means, but it will get you started. It will get you started thinking and engaging in this festival, and hopefully has undone some stereotyping of it, and hopefully you feel some permission and freedom to enjoy it and get into this festival and understand what it's about and what applications it has for you. And hopefully you like my little paper doll. I think that just clarifies so much and really brings together all of the feasts. So may you have a wonderful rest of your time before Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, and look forward to talking to you, doing a Rosh Hashanah basics video. And I know a lot of you probably are going, what is that? But just stay tuned, you'll find out about that, and then we're going to hit and enter into the spring feast season, and you'll just, may you be blessed. May the King of the universe, Yahovah Elohim, Yahweh Elohim, the great one, the mighty warrior, creator of all things, the righteous one, the Melchizedek, may he see you. May he give you eyes to see and ears to hear. And may he give you this dress that is going to get you into the happily ever after. May you ask the Ruach what pleases the King, and then may you wear that. Thank you for watching. I think for now I'm going to nosh on a rose water cookie. I definitely should have had a that I forgot to mention was that during Purim we dress up, so we actually will put on some costumes so the girls don't feel like they're missing out on the fun of dressing up like their friends do during Halloween. We actually choose to enjoy like a masquerade party at Purim, and we dress up, and it doesn't have to be biblical costumes. We dress up Persian, you dress up sometimes in whatever costume that you want, like a 1800s dress or whatever. So that always makes Purim extra special fun. And then the other thing I forgot was that Purim is a time to practice coming before the King. So on that line, we actually last year built a corridor in a big gym that we had access to, and it was really awesome. So if you want to view what that corridor looks like, then you'll go to my YouTube video from Purim last year, which would be 2016, I believe, Purim 2015. So go to that video and look at it, and you'll see what the corridor was like. But the idea of practicing to coming before the King is what Purim is about. So we prepare, but we also practice coming before the King. And who doesn't need practice? I mean, what an incredible opportunity to practice coming before the King. So we built this corridor, we dressed up, and wow, it was a powerful experience to walk down that corridor and turn that corner and thinking you were going to come face to face with the King of the universe. And you fell to your knees and you just worshipped, and it was a really powerful thing. So if we ever get the chance to do that again, we'll set up that corridor, but that's something we do during Purim as well.